I was at a conference last week, and one of the speakers told a story I had forgotten. I'd read years ago, back from the days of apartheid in South Africa. A story about Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was one of those leaders of the nonviolent movement trying to end apartheid, that sort of system of government-enforced racial segregation between the African black majority and this small, powerful white colonial minority that had been in place for a long, long time. And in Tutu's days, the power dynamic was totally lopsided. The South African apartheid government had the military and the police and the authority and the power. And the storyteller was recalling this scene of Tutu and some of his folks who are in a nonviolent march. They're literally just walking, these ordinary citizens. I mean, he's a church person, right? He doesn't have any elected office. He doesn't have any other kind of power, but they're just walking in an effort to resist apartheid. And they come up to this big wall of armed troops in riot gear, right, who were there trying to quell this demonstration. And the story goes, Tutu comes up to one of these armed guards and all the riot gear and the helmet and the mask and the weapons and all that, and just says to them, "Don't you want to be on the winning side?" What a question, right? Because to the external observer, the power is lopsided in favor of the folks with all the weapons and the riot gear and the armor and things like that. They look like the powerful, and here comes Desmond Tutu insisting, no, the side that is fighting against apartheid will win in the end. Eventually, apartheid will crumble. Eventually, your way of doing things will end. Wouldn't you rather be on the side of treating people equally? Wouldn't you rather be on the side of the people who look like they're on the bottom now, rather than being on the side of the ones with all the riot gear trying to stomp on other people's faces? And I love that story, both because it is such a great example of Desmond Tutu's delightful sense of humor, but also of the kind of vision that voices like his have, because they've been captivated by Jesus' vision that turns our usual expectations upside down. That is, in some ways, on display every Sunday. We hear stories from the Gospels about how Jesus' perspective takes our usual assumptions about the world and flips them on their head. But it's especially true this coming Sunday as we begin several weeks in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. And at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount are these statements of blessing that are sometimes called the Beatitudes. And to get just how surprising, how counterintuitive they are, hold that story, that memory, that line of Desmond Tutu in your mind when he walks up to the armored and heavily weaponed riot gear police and says, "Don't you want to be on the winning side? Come be on our side." Because Jesus has this way of taking our expectations of where God's blessing rests and flipping it on its head. Jesus' list of the blessed includes those who are poor in spirit, and those who are mourning, and those who are hungry and thirsty for justice to be done, and those who are meek and lowly, those who are persecuted for the sake of doing right, those who seek to make peace, those who are persecuted because they've been trying for justice and righteousness to be done. It's a surprising list, because in the rest of the world, that's not how it works. The winners are the powerful. The winners are the ones who come out on top. The winners are the ones with more money and more status and the riot gear and the power and the ability to threaten and dominate. The rest of the world uses that kind of language to talk about who the winners are. And here Jesus is turning the tables and saying, in God's ordering of things, it's just the opposite. In God's ordering of things, we don't have to divide ourselves into us and them. Anybody and everybody can be a part of this new thing God is doing, and it lifts up those who are lowly, those who've been stepped on, those who are empty-handed, those who are fearful and meek, those who seek to make peace in a world full of violence and conflict. It's a different set of vision. It's a different kind of values of what really matters in the world. And that's really what the Beatitudes are all about. This isn't a list of things you should aspire to be necessarily. It's not to say that to be mourning or grieving is somehow spiritually better than to be happy. It's to say God is always in the business of lifting up those who've been stepped on. God is always in the business of comforting those who are grieving. God is always in the business of rescuing those who've been persecuted. In other words, these are more a statement about the character of God than anything else, and God's way of turning the tables on what conventional wisdom says about how the world works. You and I are sent out into the world to be witnesses of that kind of upside-down set of values, of how God's upside-down kingdom operates. And in a world where still it feels like the people with more weapons or more intimidation or more force are the ones who are the winners at the end of the day, we're called to point to a different ordering of things, where what ultimately matters is making peace and doing justice and comforting those who are hurting and filling the hungry, especially those who are hungry for justice to be done. That different set of values is what makes us followers of Jesus different in the world, and not just one more, snake oil salesman peddling some spiritual self-help. We're convinced that God gives us a different vision for how we live in the world, so that we can even face those moments when, like Tutu faces, the bullies in riot gear seem like they're going to win the day. We may walk up to them and say, "Don't you want to be a part of the winning side? Don't you want to be a part of what God's doing that turns the tables on what winners and losers look like?" Join us this Sunday as we begin to delve into the Sermon on the Mount and God's upside-down set of values that we meet there in Jesus. See you then.